Michael Glover Smith again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me back, Jake.
We're here to talk about your second film, Mercury in Retrograde. And then, did you have any films specifically in mind, filmmakers that not necessarily directly influenced, but anything that you were maybe going for, people who in some way influenced whether the story or this level of budget?
Yes, I did, but it wasn't anything obvious, it wasn't anything obvious at all. Like, I was really thinking a lot about Voyage to Italy, the Roberto Rossellini film. Like, I loved the idea that it was, you had two people who had traveled far from home and were confronting each other for the first time in a long time because they were away from home. Like, that was really an exciting idea to me, because I feel like, that's something that I realized, is that oftentimes people go on vacation because they want to have fun, but then it's like whatever problems exist in their relationship sort of sometimes come to the surface because you're kind of facing each other in a way that maybe you don't at home because you have to work and you have other obligations. So that was kind of, Voyage to Italy was a big influence. And then beyond that, like, a lot of people said to me that it reminded them of, Hollywood comedies from the 1980s, including, like the National Lampoon's Vacation and films in that vein. But like a sort of austere, like European art film version of a 1980s vacation comedy, because we do have some silly moments in there, like the whole disc golf thing is pretty broad, and I wasn't consciously thinking of that, but I think there is something to that because I grew up in the 80s and I saw those movies like The Great Outdoors and Summer Rental and Vacation, which I actually think is a great movie. And then when Frank Ross was editing the film, he told me that his favorite movie of all time, or at least the film that had the biggest influence on him, was a movie called Easy Money with Rodney Dangerfield and Joe Pesci. And I had never seen it, and I like, while he was cutting Mercury, he kind of gave me his personal DVD. He's like, "Oh, you gotta watch this, take this home." And I watched it, and it was hilarious because I could see how it had influenced him, because even though it's a pretty broad comedy, it had there was an authenticity to the Italian American milieu in it that was really impressive. Like, there's a wedding scene in it that's so good. And I remember saying, like, man, that wedding scene and that kind of reminded me of the one at the beginning of The Godfather. And, I thought I was being kind of perverse by making that comparison. And Frank was like, no, it's better than The Godfather. So, I mean, I think a little bit of that is in there as well. Yeah.
Is there, I found this with doing films of my own, but do you sometimes find, like, going back after maybe when you're editing or when you're watching a film as it's finished, that you find you're like, oh, that reminds me of this other film that wasn't even a conscious influence? But
yeah, that does happen. That happens a lot because, everything you see, every image you see, whether it's in a movie or whether it's a painting or a photograph or just looking at the world, those images lodge themselves in your subconscious. And that has happened where usually what will happen is I'll rewatch a movie and I'll recognize that I composed a shot that was definitely influenced by something from that movie, but I literally was not aware of it in the moment.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the library, I guess, again, like language of film that you can find just from watching so much. It becomes an unconscious part of your own work.
I wish I could think of an example from Mercury to illustrate that point, but I can't. But I definitely did that with that short film at Last Okima, I stole a shot subconsciously from Days of Heaven. There's a scene where a guy is in a closet listening to records, and it begins with a shot of the bottom of the door. You see the crack between the door and the floor, and there's like light. You can see that there's a light on inside the closet. And I remember maybe a year or two after we made that movie, I was watching Days of Heaven, and it's like, I totally stole that.
Yeah, it's a weird difference, I think, between what gets talked about a lot more of, I don't know, Tarantino's the big one.
Yeah.
Of like, Pulp Fiction dances from
8.5.
But
well, he makes somebody used the phrase karaoke movies. Like he's hyper aware of stealing, and I think I don't want to talk about that too much, but there's a whole debate you could have about are you how original are you being? But if you can come, it's like sampling in hip hop or anything else. It's like, it depends on how you do it. I mean, you can take, everybody steals, right? And it's a question of like, can you combine it in a way, or there's a lazy way to do it. I'll tell you an example of something that I think is lazy, and this is kind of a hot take. Francis Ha, the use of the David Bowie song "Modern Love." I mean, you've seen Leos Carax's Bad Blood, right?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, they stole that.
Yeah. And
here's the thing: if you're going to reference something like that, you should do it in a way where you're adding on to it, or where the audience is aware of what you're doing. But basically what they did was they just recreated it with the same song, the same tracking shot, the idea of someone running and dancing their way down the street. And the people who are going to like that the most, who watch Francis Ha, are going to be the people who never saw Bad Blood.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing where if once you go back and you see the original, it's just like, oh, they just took it wholesale.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also 400 Blows. He uses some of the score from that.
And he uses the music, a lot of the music from that. Again, which I'm not crazy about.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah,
you're taking music that has a very specific resonance for cinephiles who know where that's from, and you're kind of hijacking it. You're hijacking the emotional associations that people have, but you're not doing it in a critical way or in an intelligent way. It's just like you're just stealing the vibe.
Yeah, building off someone else's decision, I guess.
Yeah.
But
sorry, I didn't mean for this to turn into a talking shit about Noah Baumbach conversation.
Not at all. It's part of it. Yeah, it's just from my own experience, anecdotally, for the feature that I made, going into it, I knew Edward Yang was a big influence in composition, which of course it's Edward Yang. He has a bunch of other stuff going on, but I was saying EE a lot. Like that was like my talking point as one of the references.
That movie's the greatest.
Oh the best. But it was like a few nights before shooting, the DP came up early, and we were like, oh, we should watch some stuff just to refresh our memories. And he was like, I'm not feeling EE. It's 3 hours long, which is like fair. He hadn't seen a Taipei Story.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, okay, we'll do that. It's like similar wavelength. It's still Edward Yang, and watching that right before making it, I was like, oh, there's like some moments in here where I like subconsciously was like, that's a little similar to what we're about to do. So it's just something I find interesting. Without the unconscious sampling, if you will. But, so how did you go about getting this one up and running? Because I find that can be sometimes the hardest part. Like you can write fairly easily, but
this film had a tortured genesis, where basically, I wrote the script. It was going to be set in North Carolina. Then a former student of mine came to a screening of Cool Apocalypse, and I was talking about the next film I wanted to do in North Carolina, and he approached me and said, hey, I'm getting ready to turn 21, and I'm going to inherit a bunch of money. I'm going to come into a bunch of money, and I would love to help you make this film. And it was actually his idea that we shoot in Michigan. because he said my family owns a lot of property there, and not only could I invest money, but I could give up. We have like this. We have all this property on the lake, and we have cabins there that the cast and crew could even stay in. You could shoot in the lake house, and then the cast and crew could stay there. So that was kind of too good to pass up, and I think that's when I first thought about changing the location of the script. And to make a long story short, the guy totally flaked out on me, which is not surprising considering he was 20 years old. He kind of, after meeting about it a few times, and of course I was all gung-ho, he kind of said, oh, I've changed my mind. I'm going to do something else with my money. But by that point, we had already hired a lot of the cast and crew because I was operating under the assumption that we were going to have a lot of money. And, because he had sort of agreed to it verbally, but not financially. And so at that point, we had hired Jason Chu, who was the great DP from Henry Gamble's birthday party. And I had hired some of the cast. I believe I had hired Shane Simmons to act in it. And Shane had production experience. So when this kid sort of, withdrew his offer to invest, I remember turning to Shane and said, look, I know you're only signed up to act, but, do you think you could help me produce this? Because I don't, I need to find money, and I don't know where to begin. And then I went down to Florida for a wedding, to attend a friend's wedding, and then I ended up meeting someone down in Florida who became the primary investor, and he ended up becoming a producer on the film as well. So, that was a fluke, but it also was, I think, a testament to how I was not willing to give up. It was kind of like everywhere I went, I was looking, I felt like we had enough momentum going in terms of the cast and crew that, I believed I could still do it. And then I did it.
Yeah, getting the momentum going can be a huge driver once there's other people involved and schedules going. So did you end up having to find more financing beyond this one?
Yeah, and that ended up being a huge problem because what happened was eventually we hired two actresses who were, not native to Chicago or Illinois. I mean, we hired the great Roxanne Mesquita, who I had been a fan of in so many French films, including Fat Girl, which she's the co-lead of, and Najara Townsend, who had been in some indie films that I really liked. The first thing I ever saw her in was Me and You and Everyone We Know by Miranda July, and she was kind of a little girl in that, but she had still, she had acted into adulthood, and so I had offered two of the female roles to those actresses, and they were both living in Hollywood at the time, and they both agreed, and that was kind of mind-blowing to me. I sent them the script from Mercury. I sent them a link to Cool Apocalypse. I think I also sent them a link to Henry Gamble because of the involvement of Shane and Jason, and I kind of said, imagine this script with the production value of Henry Gamble, and then look at my first film. And so they were game to do it, and then at that point we still only had enough money to get through the shooting stage, and I kind of remember saying to my producing partners, look, let's just shoot it, we'll have all the footage in the can, and then we can raise the rest later, because once potential investors see Roxanne's performance, because she's a very intense performer, and once they see Jason's beautiful cinematography, then it will be easy to raise the rest of the money. And of course it ended up being the opposite of easy. Because it was like impossible to raise money after we were done, and the original investor, who was also producing, Kevin, he ended up, loaning money to the production, and I ended up kicking in some of my own money at a certain point, and it was a nightmare because at that point we had hired a composer, and he had done sort of a rough draft of a theme on a keyboard, which was lovely, and then we ended up not using him because it's like we just we didn't have enough to pay everyone.
Yeah.
So it was a very hard film to make.
Yeah. And how did you, in as much detail as you can go into, about finding financiers? Because I feel like that's a big mystery for people who are starting out at a micro budget. Like, there's obviously like the crowdfunding sources, and if you luck into meeting someone, a family member.
Unfortunately, Jake, it's still a mystery to me. In the year 2020. No, I mean, it's like I'm going through that process right now. I'm trying to make a movie for $35,000, which is low. That's it's considerably lower than both Relative and Mercury, but it's what I need, and it's what I think I can raise.
Yeah.
So. No, every time I do this, the money comes from somewhere else. I've been lucky that I've been able to meet people who are willing to, they're willing to look at what I've done in the past, and are willing to make that gamble.
Yeah, no, it is. Gambling, I found, is a very good.
It's a good metaphor.
Metaphor comparison for
because it's a high risk.
Yeah,
everybody knows that. So it helps if you can find people who have money, who are also into the arts, who think it would be fun, and who know the risk involved, but who also who like you and like your work, and who want to be there for the premiere, who want to be on the red carpet. There are a lot of people who want to do that, and they think, okay, even if I'm not going to make all of my money back, this might be a worthwhile adventure to go on, to go on this journey for the next year or two.
Yeah. And is it something where you find you try to start off maybe getting like as much of the budget as possible, and then you're filling in with smaller contributions?
That's what always happens, because after we got the one big chunk for Mercury, then there were just like little, it comes in dribs and drabs, and that's the way it's been ever since.
Yeah. And so is that coming in when you're meeting with certain people, you have a specific dollar amount in mind that you're going to ask for, and you kind of know what you can get?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay, yeah. It is, I think, one of those things that doesn't really get talked about, it's like film schools.
No, you never learn that.
Yeah.
You never learn festival strategy, and you never learn fundraising.
Yes.
Like, that's just it's kind of a big mystery, like how that happens.
Yeah.
You just learn how to shoot and edit.
Yeah. You make your short, and then Warner Brothers comes calling. Yeah. And so with obviously there's actors who you're familiar with their work already. You reached out to them. Was this a case of you just directly reaching out saying if you're interested?
Yeah, I mean the casting process went on for a long time, because I wanted a mixture of local talent. I wanted people who were kind of well regarded in Chicago, and then I wanted some outsiders as well. And we had this was also the first time I worked with Claire Cooney, who I've worked with many times since. Not many times, but every time since. And Claire was the casting director, and we cast an actress named Alana Arenas as Golda, and Alana is a Steppenwolf ensemble member. So the fact that I got someone, that to me was as exciting as working with Roxanne, because if you're a Steppenwolf ensemble member, you're acting royalty in Chicago.
Yeah.
So I thought, I was really, really happy with the cast I was able to assemble. Jack Newell, who's somewhat well-known director in his own right. Ended up playing the role of Jack, and Claire also, got him to submit a self-tape to audition, and then Kevin, of course, was the holdover from Cool Apocalypse. Like, I really enjoyed working with him, and I felt like I knew I could do something different with him. Yeah. I wanted him to play a different kind of character, and I wanted to push him out of his comfort zone and get him to do something different, and then that was, I thought, pretty fruitful.
Yeah, he's so great in all your films.
He's in the first three.
Yeah, first three. Yeah, I remember seeing Relative, just waiting for
him to pop
He was
up. The problem is he lives in Alabama now, so I'd love to work with him again, but it's hard to fly people in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, what was the rest of the pre-production process like, of like setting a schedule? This one sounds like it was shot all together in a block.
It was shot. It had to be done that way. Pre-production was lengthier because, of course, we had to travel to Michigan to do location scouting. So we went there a couple times, and the first time we went, we weren't even sure where we were going to shoot. We looked at another house, which was, I honestly can't remember if it was in Michigan or Indiana, but somebody on the crew had a friend who had a house who was willing to let us shoot there. And we went there, and it wasn't quite right. And I had looked at a lot of homes online, and I think it was the same trip where we went to the house in Michigan that we ended up shooting in, because I had fallen in love with it based on the photographs that I saw online. And so, and then after we negotiated with the owners of the home to shoot there, then we had to go back because I hired a production designer and I needed her to see it, and to see all of the other locations because, we had found sort of the disc golf course and the coffee shop, and, we needed to kind of look at all those spaces and talk about kind of how we were going to do it, and to kind of talk, and the cinematographer as well. He was, I think he was with us. Yeah, he was with us on both of those trips, and we took a lot of photographs too in order to see what it looked like and see what the light looked like and all that. Yeah,
was that what made you choose the house that you did? Was it the light and the options?
It's like casting an actor, like sometimes you can't put into words exactly what you're looking for, but then you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it was I had written a line of dialogue into the script where Najara's character sees the house for the first time, and she says, "Oh my God, this is like a fairy tale." And that first house I was talking to you about in Indiana, like that line, we would have had to cut it if we had shot there, because even though it was a house on the lake, it just looked like a house on the lake.
Yeah.
And when I saw the one in Fenville, Michigan, it looked like something out of a fairy tale. The name of that house, by the way, is Fern Hollow. If anyone wants to rent it in Fenville, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's such a beautiful part of the country. It had everything we needed. It was a short walk to the lake. So here's the other thing about locations: is like when I wrote it, it was written so that the lake was visible from the house. Like the house overlooked the lake. And then when I found Fern Hollow, the lake was a short walk. You had to walk through the woods to get to the lake. So even though it wasn't identical to the way it was described in the script, it was perfect enough in other ways that I was happy to make a few adjustments.
Yeah.
I always try and find, as a director, I'm obsessed with location, and I always try and find locations that are perfect for the way that the script is written. And sometimes it takes some searching.
Yeah.
And then once you find the place that you're going to use, I never settle. You know, I never feel like I'm settling on someplace that's boring, that with the possible exception of my apartment in Cool Apocalypse. But like I never settle for what someone's willing to let me use. You know, it's like I always want it to look right.
Yeah.
And that cabin in Fenville to me was a magical place. The way that it was surrounded by these really tall trees, and the leaves provided a kind of canopy so that the sunlight, there were shafts of light that shone through those leaves. It just feels good to be there, you know, and I thought it would be kind of an appropriate setting for the drama.
Yeah, and you have the other locations, were those all physically nearby, of like the bar, the dive bar, and the next to the coffee shop?
So here's the dirty secret: the interior of the dive bar was in Chicago. That's in Rogers Park. Yeah, wow. It's the magic of cinema, baby. So we that's a bar that no longer exists, called the Red Line Tap. So the total shooting schedule for Mercury was 12 days. We shot 2 days in Chicago, which is all the stuff you see in the beginning of the film. And a little bit at the end. And then we shot 8 days in Michigan, with the day off in the middle. And then we came back to Chicago and shot 2 more days. And the final 2 days were the interior of the bar, which is set in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Was it that just like you decided on that place, you couldn't find anywhere nearby physically, or?
I can't remember why. I think it was a similar thing where that particular bar was perfect for what I needed, and they were willing to give it up. So, and also, I think it was it also saved us a little bit of money, because we were putting up the entire cast and crew in a hotel room. And so a lot of the entire crew, they were all native to Chicago. So everyone got to stay at home during the days when we shot in the city.
Have a little bit of a budget saver, as well as getting what you want out of the location. And so how did you go about building this crew? You had seen Henry Gamble for Jason's involvement.
He was the first person I hired, and then after that, I brought back our costume person, Delina, was from Cool Apocalypse. So I brought her back. Our sound crew came from one of the producers. He had worked with them before in a commercial context. And so it was just kind of like me, Shane, and Kevin were the 3 producers, and we all ended up bringing people on board. So they kind of came from all over.
Okay. And Frank V. Ross is a filmmaker in his own right. Is that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Frank, and he was actually Shane's idea. Because I don't think they had worked together, but I think they knew each other socially. And I thought that was a really inspired idea. As soon as Shane suggested that, I thought that's brilliant. Because Frank's movies are very character driven. I think his films are different than mine. I think they're more realistic, but they're also looser. But they are character driven. So even though we were different as directors, I remember thinking, this guy's not going to be, he's not going to cut everything down. He's not going to say, oh, you don't need this and you don't need that. Because you look at his films and there's tons of stuff in there that you don't need narratively. And so that was a lot of fun. Working with Frank. There were many days where I would go out to his place in the suburbs, and I think he kind of did a rough cut without me, and then I went out there and we worked together. And then once we did that a few times, we got it to a place where we felt like it was in good enough shape to show to the other 2 producers, and then they saw it, they gave feedback, and then we continued to refine it. And then we had a rough cut screening for an audience at Columbia College. Now that was something that was new to me.
Yeah.
But they wanted to do it because there were some serious debates about like how much to cut. You know, like the original rough cut was 2 hours, I think 2 hours and 4 minutes, and you know, I think I was the only one who was pushing for it to be long. And there were also some questions about how to structure the film, because it begins with that long take circular tracking shot, which was not the first scene that I wrote. In the script, that scene fell where it takes place chronologically. Like the original script began in Chicago, but as soon as we were done shooting, I had the idea, because I knew that opening shot was such a virtuoso shot that I kind of thought that might be an interesting way to begin the movie, and then we flash back to Chicago. So like we kind of eavesdrop on these people, and you're kind of throwing a lot at the audience, because it's like you don't know who these 6 people are, but they're all talking, and there's a lot of mystery, and the fact that the camera is kind of circling around them in a way that I think feels almost ominous. I just thought that would be a cool way to begin the movie. So I actually told Frank, even before he started cutting it, that was like one of my suggestions, was try putting that first. And he did. But then one of the 2 producers saw it and said, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to be here, you know? And so that was one of the things that we wanted to ask test audience, like, does this work? Were you confused? You know, did that, you know, do you think this is an effective way to begin the movie? And believe it or not, you know, everybody who saw it liked the fact that it began that way. And some people even said that's, you know, my favorite part of the movie. You know, I loved that it began that way. So even though I was kind of scared of having a test audience, that ended up being helpful.
Yeah. And did you obviously bring in a test audience, cast and crew from not just very locally within Chicago? Did you find yourself feeling the pressure kind of daily of there's more of a budget to this, there's more responsibility to make it successful?
I mean, that was making that film was really the darkest period of my life, and that's a big part of the reason why. But you know, I should point out, I was putting the pressure on myself, you know, because I felt like this movie needed to be successful, given the fact that I was able to raise more money and that I was able to hire people who were successful, people who had a reputation. And I thought, you know, I'm going to feel like a failure if this movie isn't successful. So that pressure didn't exist at all during Cool Apocalypse. And then all of a sudden I was in like a new arena, you know, and I was putting pressure on myself. And I've told this story many times in interviews, but, you know, it was like, when we were done, there was a period where I said to everybody, I'm not going to do this again. It's too hard. And then I changed my mind, you know, minutes later. I'm like, wait a minute, I need to do it again right now. And then that's kind of how my 3rd film was born, because I thought, I'm going to do this on a much smaller scale, on a much lower budget, but everything is going to be decided in advance. And, you know, not to talk too much about that movie right now, but like, I want, you know, we're going to do this in 8 days, and we're going to race through post-production. We're going to make sure even though the budget is small, we're going to make sure we have everything we need to get it done quickly. And then we're going to premiere quickly. And then the fact that I was able to do that, stick to that schedule, was very gratifying. It kind of exercised the demons for me of Mercury in Retrograde.
So did you have like a pretty strict post-production schedule? Like, how did it work turning around from production into post on Mercury?
Oh, it dragged on forever. No, that was the problem, is because we didn't have the money. The editing went pretty quick, you know, because there wasn't a whole lot, for Frank to do. I mean, but once he was done, it was paying for the colorist and paying for the sound mix. That's what we didn't have money for, and paying for the score. That's what we didn't have money for. And we were showing it to people, hoping to raise money for that, and that's what went on forever. Was that process of submitting to festivals, telling them color's not done, sound's not done, score's not done, and we had temp music in there, and then just getting rejected from festival after festival, and then showing it to potential investors, and then not hearing back, and that dragged on for a long time. But in the end, the colorist we hired, Company 3, did an incredible job. You look at the color and the contrast in that, it's, still, I think, my best looking film from the point of view of color grading.
Yeah, like very technical level.
Yeah, it's next level. And they cut us a deal. They had a relationship with Jason, and they liked the film. And they were willing to work with us. So I'm very grateful to all of my collaborators, because they were able to, everybody kind of, wanted it to be good, and they all chipped in, and, I am proud of the end results. It's just that it was very painful to get there.
No, it sounds like it must have been.
And I also should point out, we did end up cutting more. It's the kind of the nightmare scenario where you say picture's locked, and then after you get rejected by those first few festivals, you start to second guess, and and then that's when I said, wait a minute, we can tighten up the beginning, and it became a matter of like, how much more can we lose? I started to come around to the point of view of my co-producers, like, I think it could be a little shorter, a little tighter, especially in the beginning, because the thing about that movie is, it's a slow burn narrative, and it's written that way on paper. Like, we wrote it that way, we shot it that way. You could feel the slow burn quality. You could feel it on the page. You could feel it in the room when we were shooting it. You could feel it when we were cutting it, and there's not much else to cut away to, but I remember feeling like, the ending of that movie is what people remember. That's what people like about that film. And I remember feeling like, if anything, we have to cut down the beginning in order to get to the real meat and potatoes quicker, because I remember feeling, I think people are getting bored, because they don't know where it's going. And even though I tried to create foreshadowing, I tried to drop some ominous hints early on that there was some drama coming. I think a lot of people were like, why am I watching this? I don't know who this director is. And I started feeling like, if we can, chip away at the beginning, and just get to the ending quicker, we'll have a better chance. And so that was a lesson that I learned when it came to the next couple films, was like, make the dramatic, and by the way, I should also point out, I think Mercury in Retrograde works. I mean, I think that foreshadowing is there. But when you're a filmmaker who's not well known, people who don't know you are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's like, when people watch a film by David Lynch, they give him every benefit of the doubt, right? Or Paul Thomas Anderson, right? It's like, it doesn't matter how slow or weird or dark or anything your film is, how unlikable the characters are. People are just like, they're you've built up some goodwill, and people are willing to go there. But of course, when you're a no-budget filmmaker or a low-budget filmmaker, people aren't always sure that the slow pace is intentional, right? And it's like, I think a lot of people thought that I was trying to make something like The Big Chill, like a ensemble, dramedy about couples, and that I accidentally made it boring. Like that I was trying to make something fast-paced, but I didn't have the skill, and it came out slow. but the slow pace was intentional.
Yeah.
So anyway, what I learned was it's probably better to make the stakes more obvious early on, just so you can hook the viewer, you know. And I remember, especially when I was writing Relative, there's a line of dialogue. Claire Cooney's first line, which is in the first 5 minutes of the movie, she goes, "I want to die." And I just remember thinking, like, you know, I knew the big fireworks in her storyline were gonna come at the end, because again, it's like Relative is sort of a mirror image of Mercury. They're both ensemble films that take place over a weekend, you know. And I remember thinking, let's just have her say this at the beginning, and then you know, people will be absolutely certain of the fact that, you know, this is a powder keg that's gonna explode.
Some dramatic
instead of taken by surprise.
So how much do you think the struggle with financiers was, do you think there was anything related to not having like that final sound mix and coloring was turning people off, or was it length?
I don't, you know, but you never know. You're never sure. You know, the festivals always say, like, oh yeah, we're used to watching works in progress, just send it to us, you know. But you'll never know what they would have thought had they seen the finished version. And I think the same thing with investors. It's like, you know, and for this reason, you know, whenever I'm cutting a movie, I always mix the sound while editing. And I'm amazed when people show me a rough cut and they leave the sound so rough, because it takes me out of it. You know, it's like, you just want my feedback. My feedback is start mixing the sound now, even if it's temp. Like, I know you're going to pass it along to someone else who's going to do the final thing, but like, you know, when there's a very jarring sound presence change from one shot to the next, it makes the picture edit jarring to me. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I know, it's something we've talked about in the past. I think it's something that probably doesn't get highlighted as much, of like, really, if you need to put your money somewhere between like sound and camera, you can make more, kind of like what we were talking about with your first movie, is you can use the smallness of the story, like use the digital element for your camera more, but the sound is really vital to keeping people invested. Yeah,
and it's funny that you say that, because, you know, Cool Apocalypse is the only film I've ever made where I did ADR. Interesting. Because it was so necessary. You know, there was one day where we shot and there was like a sound problem, you know, where you could hear sort of a white noise, you know, it's like a microphone cable problem. And it just was not acceptable. And nobody realized it until we were editing. And then it became a question of like, all right, what do we do? Like, reshooting is not really an option. So we got all the actors together in front of a big computer monitor and did a little rigged, you know, kind of jerry-rigged little sound studio, and you know, had them dub their lines for you know, a couple scenes. Several scenes.
It's interesting. It's the only time. Just every other film you've had, it's been on location.
And also I like location sound. You know, I mean, Mercury in Retrograde is a great example, because there's so much noise in that location that gives the location. It's just part of the character of the film. You know, I mean, notably in that movie, it rains during the climax while the characters are on the porch. Well, that was not something we planned for. But the sound of the rain is crucial. You know, like, you can't pretend like it's not there. You just have to go with it. And yet it creates the right atmosphere, you know, because this is the darkest part of the film. So that ended up being a blessing. And, you know, what's really funny about the rain is we actually had to because we shot that scene over a span of 10 hours or whatever. We shot all night long. You know, there were times where the rain let up and it stopped. So we added more rain sound to make it consistent. You know, I'm sure you've seen McCabe and Mrs. Miller, right?
Yes, yeah.
So, you know, they added like, the famous story about that movie is it snowed during the climax when it wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
And there were some shots where there was no snow. So he added, as an optical effect, he added, you know, he added snow. And we kind of did that with the rain.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like when you're in nature, there's all sorts of birds and, you know, just trees creaking and really interesting noises. And I love that stuff. You know, I'm the kind of person who never, you know, I never want to take that out. You know, I'm always amazed when the sound, you know, the sound re-record is just like, do you want to remove the sound of this actor smacking their lips? I always am like, no.
Yeah, it adds so much more to the realism. You can go definitely too far in the other direction.
Exactly.
Yeah, why is this forest sound? Yeah, like just some woods.
But, you know, it depends on what kind of movie you're making.
So with finishing this one up, with your experience of getting accepted to festivals, were you able to use some of that knowledge, experience going into submitting for this one with like where you submitted and what you were focusing on? Just what was the festival experience like for this?
Well, we premiered at Full Bloom, which had also played Cool Apocalypse, and Full Bloom, you know, gave us a red carpet premiere, and so that was, you know, that was a lot of fun. It wasn't the festival that I had dreamed of for that particular film, but it was me, both of my producing partners, one of whom was an actor, and then one of the other actors came, and it was a great experience, you know. And then that was the first of just a few festival screenings. You know, for that particular film, I only submitted to bigger festivals and kind of medium to big festivals, and you know, we got rejected by a lot. So I think it actually played fewer festivals than my first film, simply because I was aiming higher, and yet. This is still a story with a happy ending, because the one thing I did that I think was smart in the long run was I did not make it available to stream. And, you know, we had some theatrical screenings in commercial theaters where, you know, we did well in Chicago and in Michigan. There, we screened in Saugatuck at a theater close to where we filmed the movie, and that went over like gangbusters. There was like 310 people in this theater, none of whom I knew, you know, but they just wanted to see something that had been shot in their town. So that was incredible. And then we eventually, after a year plus, you know, maybe 2 years, almost 2 years later, we screened in Los Angeles. We were programmed by Rooftop Cinema Club. And shortly before that, we were programmed by a theater in Brooklyn. So I was there for both of those screenings. And that was really, really great, you know. And I remember thinking, oh, God, this wouldn't have happened if we had kind of dumped it online. If we had just made it available on Amazon. And the Hollywood screening was great because Roxanne came out and did the Q&A with us. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And then getting into distributing it eventually once the festival run was over.
Yeah, so the interesting thing was we self-distributed it on streaming. You know, we put it on Amazon ourselves and a Vimeo, and I think made it available as a rental on Vimeo, and I think maybe just those two at first, and then Music Box reached out to me when the pandemic hit, and they kind of said, do you want to do something with us? Because, you know, early 2020, every theater was trying to figure out a way to make things available to stream through their website. And I said, yeah, do you want to, you know, take a crack at, you know, making Mercury in Retrograde available? And that was available to stream on Amazon. at the time, but Music Box Direct, their own, streaming service, they were willing to do it simultaneously. So, so that was cool. Actually, before they made it available through Music Box Direct, they made it available as a kind of theatrical, rental. You may remember a lot of theaters in the early days of the pandemic were like, just stream the movie through us, like you would if you like a new movie. So it was available that way for a week or two, and then it became part of their Music Box Direct streaming service. Also, before that, we had put out a Blu-ray through a company called Emphasis Entertainment, who also put out the Cool Apocalypse DVD. So we weren't solely self-distributing it because Emphasis produced the Blu-ray.
Okay. And was that you reached out to Emphasis, or with Cool Apocalypse you knew?
With Cool Apocalypse, I had reached out to them because they had distributed a DVD by a friend of mine, I think. And so I said, hey, would you be interested in putting this out? And they said yes. So that was a really positive experience because, this was back when DVDs were a thing.
Yeah.
And I can see, I'm holding your DVD copy of Cool Apocalypse right now. This is a library copy that a library got rid of. And so, Emphasis is the kind of distributor that has relationships with libraries, which is a huge source for, a huge part of the physical media market. So, when Emphasis put out both Cool Apocalypse and Mercury, they had a certain, they had relationships with not only retailers, but also libraries. And so that, we got into a lot of stores and a lot of libraries.
Yeah. And can I ask abstractly, without like getting into specific numbers, about even more theoretically based on your experience with this film, putting it out on Amazon and Vimeo, do you see that as a financially viable way to self-distribute? And I know it depends on
Jake,
things, but
everybody knows you don't make shit from streaming.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, right? It's like pennies per hour. So even if your film is streamed, a lot, you're making very, very, very little. I mean, this is why people are on strike right now, right? Because the streamers have all the power, and they're not, they're not even revealing what their viewing numbers are. It's all abstract, right? Like they're not paying, based on viewership numbers. They're kind of renting the film to stream it for a certain amount of time, and no one's making any money.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So that's why led you more towards the trying to keep it around in festivals.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I want to keep it alive in theaters for as long as possible, because a commercial theater will split the box office with you 50-50, and those are much better terms than you're going to get from a streaming website.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just kind of last with this one, if someone watches, after they watch Mercury in Retrograde, besides your next works, which they'll get to next, what would you maybe recommend as like a next step in a viewing journey of whether something else that inspired this movie or another filmmaker you think is
you know what I just saw that I thought was terrific? I'm sure you've seen it, is Waiting for the Light to Change.
I haven't seen that.
By Lynn Tran.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So that's a Chicago movie that she made in Michigan.
Oh yeah.
In a cabin by the lake.
Yeah, it won Slamdance.
It won Slamdance, and I saw it. Actually, I gave it a 4-star review on Letterboxd, and I said the highest praise I can give this film is to say it's the best movie ever made about Chicagoans vacationing in a lakeside cabin.
Yeah.
Because I was like, wow, this is so similar to what I, was trying to do. I think she did it better. I think she did it better. And I also think, what I hadn't seen at the time that I made Mercury, but I saw it since, is Joe Swanberg's Drinking Buddies. When I saw that, I was kind of amazed that there is a sort of segment in that film that is very similar to Mercury, because there's a scene where two couples do go on a vacation to a cabin, and I think they end up kind of swapping partners, you know. But that's only like a little slice out of the middle of the film, and I thought, oh man, I wish I had seen that at the time, because he kind of, again, he did it first and he did it better.
Yeah, you got more time with it.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, thank you so much again, Michael. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it's been a blast.